Well, hello, and welcome to GeekyJustin Live, now fortified with 16 essential vitamins and minerals. I am Justin Lee, and with me today is Heidi Weaver-Smith, who is founder and president of LOVEboldly, and someone who, like me, has spent a lot of time in that space, that interesting conversation about Christian faith and LGBTQ folks, and has a lot of interesting stories to tell, I'm sure. Heidi, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to get to chat tonight.
Me too. This is going to be fun. So
Yeah.
I have to
It's like
tell
swapping war stories.
it is absolutely swapping war stories. If I can say that without any offense to folks who have been in actual war.
Actual war. Right.
we'll just start right off by minimizing
Right.
people's traumas and all that good stuff. But seriously, thanks for being here. I'm super excited for this conversation. I love that one of the first comments that came through on the stream. So for those who are listening to this over the podcast, which there is a podcast now of these conversations, so they cannot see us. So for folks who are listening to this on the podcast, there is or watching this on YouTube, there is like a 3-minute countdown when this goes live over Facebook, because it gives people a chance to start watching the stream before we start talking, so they don't miss the beginning. And during that 3-minute countdown, one of the comments from one of the commenters was, "What the heck is this?" And I'm not sure if "what the heck is this" was referencing the whole live thing. If this person this is their first time tuning into one of the live shows, in which case, hi, welcome. Or if that was a reference to the kind of club style music that I've got playing during the countdown. But either way, it made me smile. So thanks for that. All right. So Heidi, first of all, I guess for folks who are not familiar with LOVEboldly, you run this thing called LOVEboldly. What is LOVEboldly? What do you do?
Right. Well, great question. So our work really centers on inviting folks to reconcile across the divides that normally keep us apart in conversations on faith and sexuality and gender identity. And so that takes a variety of forms for us. We have various programs and services. We have dialogue events that we host. We have small groups for LGBTQ folks who maybe don't necessarily feel attached to a faith community or feel ready to reattach to a faith community. We do outreach, sort of an apology and repentance exercise at Pride every year. And we also host trainings for pastors and churches who are trying to find a better way to care well for LGBT people in their congregations and churches.
So what is it when you say apology and repentance? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, so we've done different things every year, but what we've been doing for the last number of years is we always have some sort of an apology statement at our booth. So it's either on our T-shirts or on a card that we'll give out. And this was in a large way inspired really by the Marin Foundation when they were doing this important work. And actually, the first time we did it, we partnered with them to do that event. But then alongside that, we want to do something really practical and and engage people on questions of faith while they're at Pride. And so, the first Pride that I attended, there was just the only Christians there were people with mean, hateful signs. And I thought, this is a pretty poor representation of Christ. And so we, the last several years, have built these large graffiti walls. They're 6 feet tall, and they ask questions about faith and sexuality. Things like, what do you wish your youth pastor had said to you? What made you leave your church? What would bring you back to the church? And we just get people to write in markers on the walls, and the responses have been really overwhelming and amazing. Typically, the crowds around them become so large that they actually kind of stop traffic, at Pride. So there's thousands of people trying to get past, and it's usually a really emotional experience for many people, as you can imagine. So our volunteers just get to be there to pray with people who might want that, just to give hugs and support and love. And this year we're doing something really exciting and fun, where we're actually mobilizing Christians in our local areas to write notes of encouragement and love and support for LGBT people that we will pass out at Pride as well, just to brighten the day of somebody who came to Pride and say, basically, not all Christians want your demise. We want to find ways to heal some of the hurt that has existed between our communities historically.
You're getting some really positive comments from the live viewers. Adrian says, "How cool is that?" Michael says, "Wow, I love that idea." Yeah. David says, "You notice it's the people who should be apologizing that never do." Yeah, that is unfortunately often the case. But of course, as Christians, those of us who are Christians, we are representing, in a sense, a whole church that includes folks who are doing things the right way in a lot of ways, and folks who are not, and it's a human institution, and so people are hearing the church from you. I mean, I think that's amazing. So you're not an LGBTQ plus person. You are a straight cisgender woman. So yeah, I'm telling you as if you didn't know.
What? Surprise!
I want to say that just to clarify that I did check with Heidi before saying this, that it was okay for me to say this. Like, I don't mean to out you, but so what got you into that? Well, let me first back up and say, there are folks who do this kind of work with I hate to say this, but with a kind of agenda. So it's sort of like, we want to be really nice to LGBTQ folks so that we can save them, or so that we can tell them how sinful they are, or whatever. And that's not, at least from what I know of you, that's not what you're doing. So why did you get into this?
Yeah. Well, like for most people, it was somebody that I loved. And to respond really to that comment about, it's usually the people who don't need to apologize who need to apologize. Like, I need to apologize personally. Like, that's an important spiritual practice for me to do. My upbringing was in very conservative, rural Pennsylvania. I was actually raised Mennonite, and so most of my life I was very sheltered and protected. Most of my life, I didn't think I knew anyone who was LGBT. And so I just, my earliest messages about LGBTQ, QIA folks was, like many of us have heard, just negative sort of stereotypes and a lot of hush hush, like we're not really going to talk about it, right? And so I had all of these stereotypes about who an LGBTQ person might be. And it was just through becoming very close friends with somebody who was gay, who, shared very openly with me, and was somebody who he really enjoyed sort of poking the bear. Like, he had a really mischievous sense of humor. And so I think, when I met him, I thought, as a good evangelical, upbringing, I was like, I have come to save the day for this gay man who is lost, and I'm going to convert him. I'm going to help him be straight. I mean, that was the view that I had at that time in my life. And I really thought God had given me as a gift, as awful as that sounds, to him, to help him on his journey. And what I grew to realize was that person had been put in my life, not so that I could fix or change them, but so that God could fix and change things in me. And it was just through a lot of honest dialogues and conversations with him and with the many, at that time it was mostly gay men that he started introducing me to in his social circles, that I just started to see how deep and painful the divide was between those people that I loved the most dearly for all of my life, conservatively minded straight Christians, and the LGBT community, and how much misunderstanding existed between these two groups of people. And as I heard stories from these men sharing with me what their experiences had been like with Christians and with the church, I was incredibly humiliated to hear them saying things that had damaged them, that had really hurt them spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and had really set them back. And they were things that I could have said or done, or might have said or done. And so I feel like as a straight cisgender person, I really have a responsibility to own that and to call that for what it is, and to repent in the true Christian sense of repentance, to try to do something different than what I've done in the past, and in hopes that will help somebody who's hurting.
Yeah, I think that's incredible, and I know that we've got a number of other straight cis allies who are watching or listening to this, who are I imagine quite a few of them looking to you as a hero and thinking that, this is who I want to be, somebody who actually makes this a part of of their being in the world. And I have to remind myself sometimes that we've got probably people who are watching and listening who don't know the term cisgender. So let me just say for those of you who are not familiar with the term cisgender, or cis as I'm kind of abbreviating it, that's essentially the opposite of transgender, in the way that straight is the opposite of gay and bisexual is kind of in the middle there. The vast majority of us are cisgender. We've got a whole bunch of comments coming in here, and I just want to pull everything. But one of them, somebody asked, Amy asked, is there a Love Boldly website / Facebook page you could link? And
great question.
Yes. Yeah. How do people find you on the interwebs?
You can go to it's www.loveboldly.net. All one word, loveboldly.net. And yes, you can sign up for our mailing list at the bottom of the webpage. You can learn all about all the exciting things we're doing, the trainings and events that we have coming up.
Mavis says, Heidi's heart is so pure and she always approaches difficult conversations from a place of grace and love. I know that to be true as well. And before we get too far away from the conversation at the beginning of this hour, I have to also mention that David said, don't ever change the music, please.
I didn't have the pleasure of hearing the music before this interview, but I'm going to have to rewatch it just to experience it.
If you watch these live on Facebook, on my Facebook page, facebook.com/GeekyJustin, there's this music at the beginning of all of them, but I cut it out when I put it on YouTube or in the podcast because people don't need to hear that every time. Okay, so I want to talk to you about some tough stuff. Like we're having this fun, conversation, la-di-da, let's be nice to people and good stuff in the world and apologies, and like this is great. But this is a tough topic, because I feel like we are in a place in society right now where we've gotten so polarized that a lot of folks are skeptical of any kind of nuance, any kind of bridge building, and in some cases not just skeptical, but actually in I would say a lot of cases, folks would argue that to be in a kind of middle space, where you and I both have spent a fair amount of time in kind of middle spaces talking to people on both sides who disagree with each other, that is inherently bad because you are giving a platform to the bad folks, whoever they see as the bad folks.
Right.
These folks would argue, look, there are rights and wrongs in the world, and everybody can't be right. And sometimes some people are wrong, and sometimes they're wrong in a way that is harmful and damaging to people. And if you focus on dialogue and bridge building in a way that could, give everybody a platform, everybody a place at the table, then you're not taking an appropriate stand against what is wrong. And what's interesting is, my guess is that you have gotten this both from the folks who say you should be taking a clearer stand against what is wrong, with the wrong folks being anybody who is LGBTQ or pro-LGBTQ, and also folks who are saying you should be taking a stand against those who are wrong, which would be folks who have conservative theology on LGBTQ stuff.
Right.
So, number one, and I already know the answer to this, but you can answer anyway. Do you get that kind of criticism? And how does that affect you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question. Of course, we get that kind of criticism. I think that is the nature of intentionally befriending people who have very different viewpoints. And, I truly do have like some of my closest friends and family on both sides of this topic, having very different views. And I intentionally cultivate those relationships even when it's hard, because I believe in the importance of that so much, and because I just genuinely love these people, and I see that there really is some room for disagreement on this topic. Now, that being said, I think your point about damage is a really important one, and I think that I have had to be quite a learner in this process, and I'm always trying to, sort of check my straight cis privilege and ask, am I allowing voices to be elevated that are damaging? And it's really hard to know, I think, where that line is, because inherently, if some of my most sacred convictions collide with some of your most sacred convictions, I'm going to believe that your views are damaging in some way, and you're going to believe that mine are damaging in some way. And so, cultivating a space where there's room for some disagreement without harming one another is challenging. There are some boundaries I've had in place for our work that I am unapologetic about. I do not allow people to, sort of champion reparative or conversion therapy in any of our dialogues. Like, that's not, I don't select speakers.
Pray away the gay type stuff.
Right. Like you need to change your orientation or your gender identity, because I see that as inherently harmful to LGBTQ people. And I think there's research that backs that up, and I will go to the mat for that. And I think that there are faithful Christian ways to respond, even within more traditional conservative views on sexuality and gender identity, that don't include that as the pastoral response. And so, I think finding those ways to allow disagreement to happen without harm is difficult on any topic, but I think it is really important. And I think and the reason I think and know it's important is because it was important for me to have that. And it was important for me in my journey to have people who would meet me where I was at and challenge me and push me to grow, but also, be willing to let me say really dumb stuff, that really hurtful things sometimes. I will never forget when my first gay friend said to me one day, one of our very first conversations about sexuality was, he goes, "Do you think that my relationship is contributing to the moral degradation of our society?" I was like, "Oh crap! How do I embrace honesty in this moment and not completely burn down this relationship,
Yeah.
And I was like, kind of. And because that was the honest truth. That was truly the view and the worldview I was raised with. And he was like, "You think that I am contributing to that?" And I was like, I don't know how to respond to this, because I suddenly, now you're like personalizing it for me. And like, no, I don't think you're doing that. Or like, if you are, it's not intentional. I was so confused, like, how do I wrap my head around this? And, but it's because I could have that conversation with him. And then, in the weeks and months to come, he stayed in relationship with me. Even though that's an incredibly hurtful thing to say to somebody, like
Right.
incredibly hurtful. And, and so those are the things that I have to apologize for now. But I didn't know what I didn't know. And I know so many Christians who are in that space that, I think of myself as a fairly empathetic person. Like, I'm pretty high on the compassion scale in general. And, the culture and worldview I was raised with just didn't open my eyes to it until they were opened. And so I have to remind myself of that, even when I, sometimes get frustrated with people who espouse views like that now.
Right.
That, in the beginning, when God's work in my life was teaching me to love my LGBTQ neighbor, now sometimes for me it's teaching me to love people who look like I used to or believe like I used to. And that's kind of hard to be confronted with yourself sometimes.
I wonder if the fact that you and I have this shared past in those spaces where we realize, we look back at who we were and realize that there are things that we believed or said or did that now we would see as harmful, if that makes it easier for us to enter into these middle grounds and have these difficult dialogues. Because even though I'm gay, I resonate with everything that you just said. Like, I also at one time held a lot of very anti-LGBTQ, specifically anti-gay views. I didn't know that I was gay, and I think, for me at least, that does help me to have these conversations. But like, I hear a lot of fellow gay folks say, you need to do some self-care, and that means cutting out of your life any of the people who don't agree with you, like any of the people who don't fully support you, who are not fully affirming. And on the one hand, I do understand why, for a lot of folks who've been hurt over and over again, who are just trying to find some ground, who are trying to like figure out how to move forward in life, I do understand the need sometimes to say, look, I just can't continue this conversation. But I also think that if all of us did that all of the time, your friend would have never had that conversation with you. And so like there's got to be some nuance here to how we approach these things. I'm not going to say everyone must always stay in all of these conversations all the time, but I also don't want to say everyone should leave them all of the time.
Right.
And that nuance is tough, because I feel like we live in this world of just like black and white, yes and no. Are you on my side or are you on the other side? And do you struggle when people ask, like, what side are you on in this conversation?
Yeah, totally. I'm like, what question are we talking about? There's like 1,000 questions we could talk about. And it's very difficult, to figure out how to honor the people in your life that are most sacred to you when you have those competing relationships. I think that's a challenge for all of us. And I do think that there is this tendency to want to run from those conversations, especially I think particularly in the political atmosphere that our country is in right now. But I'm really unapologetic when I say the work that we are doing is not for everyone at every season of their life. Like, right. We've had a number of people connect to us for a season and then disconnect because they've gone on to a different view, or they've kind of come into an unapologetic view of where they're at, and they need that self-care, or they need, the support of like-minded community rather than being challenged on every sort of angle. And I think there's a time and a season for it. I need my people who are going to have my back too, and who I can say anything to. And I think we all need that. And I think particularly as somebody who is a friend of both conservatively minded folks and LGBTQ folks, both conservatively minded and more progressive and affirming views within the LGBTQ community. I want to be a person who, for me, the traumas of some of those comments are always secondary. I experience those through people that I love, but when people say those things, it's not directed at me. And so I feel like my job as a friend to people who are more affected by that, LGBTQ folks who, can be triggered for months from a comment. For me, I might be triggered for a day or two, but I can get through that in a different way. And so I feel like my job as an ally is to really, occupy those spaces where, and sort of go before in LGBTQ folks who aren't ready to go there, and invite along those who do want to be in those spaces and elevate those voices even above my own. But recognizing that some people need to exit dialogue because it's not a part of what God is doing in their lives right then, and it's not helpful for them. And I think that's important to recognize that.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to the comments here. Some affirming comments for you. Matthew says, "Love you, Heidi, and we appreciate you." Matt, not Matthew, but Matt says, "Thank you. Bearing the burden with little support is tiring. Sincere thanks for your voice." Dan says, "That is such a hard line to walk. I want to just scream at people and walk away so often, but if no one engages, then no one changes." Linda says, "We should be able to have respectful conversation even when we are on opposite sides." And Joanne says, and this is a longer one, "Confused, as a lifelong Christian who began standing up in 1980s for gay individuals, basically 40 years of walking the walk. I'm an empathetic personality, yet in all kindness here, the message needs to be clear. All are accepted. People who slandered me in the 1980s respect me the most today. As they changed, I've left churches as told not to not speak up, very nervous about this middle ground. So we'll research more about Love Boldly. Have your own center that you know as people respect your conviction of acceptance of all blessings." Okay, so this thing about nervous about the middle ground. So for somebody who says both, I'm nervous about this middle ground, like what is this middle ground? And to be fair, you did not use the phrase middle ground. I did. But certainly there are folks who would say that you are in a middle ground. I think that I am often at a middle ground. Although I'm gay and I think I'm very open about what my theology is on this, but I think Love Boldly, a lot of folks would characterize as being in the middle ground in some way, shape, or form. So, how, for folks who are like, okay, I'm nervous about this middle ground, and B, you're a straight cis woman doing this work. Like on the one side, you're just talking about how you have the ability to have some of these conversations that are harder for LGBTQ folks because, it's not about you personally. And maybe there are folks who will listen to you who wouldn't listen to somebody like me.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. But the flip side of that is folks would say, well, okay, but this isn't your fight. Why aren't you out there in a more, in what they would see as I think a bolder space, like what's with this kind of middle space that you're occupying, and again, recognizing that I said middle ground and you didn't. How would you characterize kind of the work that you do, and how would you respond to folks who are nervous about it? That's a really big question.
It's
actually lots
question.
of questions. Yeah.
And I do want to say, anyone, I'm happy to engage this question more offline. So, if that's something that you're wondering more about, like, we probably need to sit down and have a video chat on our own, or coffee, and really, I mean, I completely, I have real appreciation, as full appreciation as I can as a straight cisgender person. I have true appreciation for the way that the approach we take makes people nervous, and makes people feel worry. And and we have earned that as straight cisgender Christians because of the way that we have treated LGBTQ folks, with lots of bait and switch tactics, and that's just not what we're about. That's not at all what we're about. That being said, we are pretty unapologetic about the fact that we do kind of, take this space where we refuse to say, yes, everyone should be fully affirming, or yes, everyone should maintain the traditional view of Scripture. Because the fact of the matter is, there is opportunity for people to grow in their relationship with Christ wherever they are at in that space. And our mission has always been, and I'm going to get a little geeky theologically on you, but our mission has always been very centered in a deep love and appreciation for the incarnation, for the way that God literally moved into our neighborhood. And as we were driving the nails into his hands, was forgiving us, loving us, and finding a way to restore relationship. And I'm moved by that example. I'm moved by the example that Jesus made for us. And so I feel like my call is different than many who are out there with a much more affirming and clear view on that, and wanting to help move the needle to make others more affirming and make others more inclusive. I appreciate that work, and I celebrate what that is doing for LGBTQ folks. But I see my work as a little different than that, because I see our work as reaching folks that otherwise won't get reached. And there are relationships that we've been able to cultivate by holding this tension in this space that I'm not willing to give up. And I'm not willing to give it up for the youth that are in those churches, and for the LGBTQ people who are in their journeys of just maybe discovering who they are and trying to reconcile their faith and sexuality. And I think we're sometimes very quick to get past that stage and think nobody else should have to go through that stage. But that's an important part of the process. And I want to be a support to LGBTQ folks, both more traditionally minded and more progressive affirming. And so to do that, I have to be willing to live in that tension. And so I hear that criticism and completely can understand if somebody is not jiving with our particular approach. And I will send you to many other orgs that are doing awesome work, and will champion them all the day long. But I don't see many people occupying the space that we are in, and it's the reason why we're still around after all these years, because I just don't see people doing it the way that we're doing it. And I think it's really important for the safety and well-being of many LGBTQ youth and adults closeted in faith environments and in sort of welcoming but not affirming environments. And we want to keep being a resource for them as well.
I really think that's so important. I mean, I really do, because there is this, I think when we're so quick to draw the lines, I mean, I think the challenge is, again, here's this nuance. The challenge is, if you stand for nothing, then you're not going anywhere. If you stand for something in such a way that you are drawing lines and preventing people from joining you in the conversation, you're also going nowhere, or you're going there, but you're without a whole bunch of people whose minds ultimately you would like to change, right? And so, like, there's this weird kind of dance, I feel like, that you have to do to have these conversations. So a bunch of comments coming in. Scroll back here. People are like have opinions. But actually, a lot of really positive stuff for you. Yeah. Let's see. Eric says the middle ground is an excellent place to build from, but it's not easy. Linda says middle ground is important. People arguing sides goes nowhere, which I just said in way more words after Linda said it. So let's pretend I didn't say it. We'll just go with Linda's version. Gregory says, opportunity, that's the key word. You can't move toward anyone if you don't clear a way for opportunity. And Alan Chambers, hi, Alan.
Wow. Hi,
says,
Alan.
So well said, Heidi. #tension. So somebody else said something I want to find here. Steve. Steve says, this is a little while back Steve said this, but the current political atmosphere is very toxic and divisive. Left unchecked, this can unfortunately flow into other areas of one's life. This is contrary to building bridges of understanding. You also mentioned earlier about the political climate, and I don't want to get into a conversation about politics specifically, but I will say that one thing that's been bothering me is I feel like politics is certainly related to the kind of polarization that we've got in society right now, where like I feel like I used to be able to say to people, I have friends on both sides of the aisle, and friends whose political opinions are not necessarily on either side of the aisle, who are, kind of all over the place. There are other political parties and other political viewpoints and perspectives. And most people would kind of, go, oh yeah, I mean, that's a good thing. It's a good thing that you have friends who have different views. There was never any implication when I said that, at least that I heard from anybody, that my having friends on both ends of the political spectrum meant that I didn't know what I believe, or that, or whatever. It was sort of like, yeah, it's good to have multiple influences and multiple, hear people's voices. Right. And I feel like recently we've gotten to a place where I hear from folks on the political left and on the political right, a lot of judgment and distaste when I say, oh, I have friends who are on both sides of the aisle, that there's this sense of like,
How could you?
How could you? Yeah. How could you be friends with them?
Right.
And I don't know what to do with that, because it's like, well, because this person is my friend, whether or not I agree with them on everything politically or theologically or, culturally, and some of the issues we disagree on are important. Some of the issues I would like to change people's minds on, but like, how did we get to this place? Have you felt that too?
I don't know. I'm really reflecting as you're saying that, and I definitely I feel that tension in myself sometimes. Like, how am I friends with all of these people? But I don't know if I've been challenged by other people. Like, how could you be friends with A, B, or C? I think
I'm just the lucky one.
Maybe. I think it comes up from time to time when, like, for instance, if somebody finds out that somebody I featured in an event has a more drastic view than what they anticipated, or, I think sometimes it will pop up that way. Like, how could you let that person talk? But I don't, and that's both sides. I mean, hands down, both sides. I have folks who want me to get rid of every affirming viewpoint that we ever have at an event, and or every conservative one. So, I mean, some pressure, but I think it's interesting to hear you saying that you experience that. And I wonder if that has anything to do with the fact that as a gay man, you're getting that pressure in a different way than I do as a straight cisgender person.
It may be. I mean, also, I think it's probably true that a lot of my friends are, just because of the work that I do, that a lot of my friends are very activist minded.
Yes, I do get that.
And it's difficult. Like, I really struggle. Like, I've been referred to as an activist more than a few times. I kind of had a moment when because I have a Wikipedia page which I never check, and so like occasionally I'll go to my Wikipedia page and find out that it says all kinds of like wrong stuff about me, and I'm like, who wrote this stuff? Like, I don't but when I found out that my Wikipedia page had like made me Justin Lee (parenthesis activist) and parenthesis, like activist, because there are other Justin Lees in the world, and so I'm Justin Lee activist. And I'm like, of all the things, like activist is a word to me that like I think I grew up hearing the word activist with a negative connotation all the time. And I'm trying to lean into it a little bit, but at the same time it's like I have some misgivings about the word activist, even though I think in some ways I like advocate better, I think. But because to me activist sounds so like single issue focused and like, you know, us versus them mindset, which is not a fair description of all activists, but it's like what my brain hears. And so that's not how I see myself. But I think I think I have a lot of activist friends. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting because I feel that way about the word ally. Like,
oh, really? Oh, let's talk about
many
this.
of my friends are like, why don't you like that? And I'm like, because it just, to me, the word ally, it sounds to me like we're painting LGBTQ people like these weaklings that need an ally to come and fight for them. And I'm like, I am not that person. Like, I would much rather be called a friend of LGBTQ folks. Like, and you know, I think that ally is a fine term for many people. Like, I don't fault anyone for using it to call other people allies. But I think, you know, for me personally, I'm like, I would much rather just think of myself in friendship. Like, I care about you. You're, you know, you're a true friend to me. And I think our meaning of friendship is so weak, that we, you know, to me, that's a much stronger term to call yourself a friend of someone. Like, you have to care about the things that they care about. You have to, you know, be, you know, with them, even if you don't always agree with them. You know, you have to be willing to hear them out and learn what things upset them, and, you know, be there with them when they're sad and upset or when they're celebrating. And to me, that's a more beautiful term to describe, I think, what Christians, straight cisgender Christians, should be to the LGBTQ community.
I think friendship is such a powerful thing, and clearly friendship is what, you know, changed your life in a way too.
Yeah.
So being in this space, having these difficult conversations, does this stress you out? It stresses me out. And I've talked to a few of the other people who've come on this about like the stress.
I think the stress comes when so there's a like public persona, and then there's the personal, right? Like, we all have that.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And I think the stress comes from when you live in a space like this, or you lead an effort like this, or the work that you have done for so many years, Justin. It's like, all right, when am I going to say something that somebody is going to jump all over? Like, how many emails am I going to have to send to fix it when I build a fire I didn't mean to build? You know, and I think some of that stress happens for sure. And I even, sometimes I stress like, oh, can I tell that person that I'm friends with that other person?
Right.
Like, and then I feel like a horrible friend, like, you know, for even feeling that way, you know, but it is difficult to feel like you're sort of constantly editing, and, you know, and at the same time trying to be transparent and full of integrity. Like, one of the things that I have said from the very beginning of this work is, not just for myself, but for every volunteer and for every person attached to LOVEboldly, I want us to have the same message when we talk to an LGBTQ person as we do when we talk to a conservative pastor. I don't want to be using different language in order to get one or the other on our side. And that is incredibly challenging.
That is challenging.
And so, you know, I sort of have a filter for myself where I'm like, if I'm in front of a room of LGBTQ folks, I want to know that if there's a conservative pastor or a conservative friend sitting in this room, that I wouldn't change what I would, the words that I would use. You know, I might shift my message based on who I'm talking to, but that I would be comfortable saying this in front of anyone. And that's really a hard thing, to be thinking about the person who's not in the room all the time.
I have never heard you say this. And this is like, it's, that hits me really hard because, I mean, in a good way, but like in that that's really powerful, because I think about like just in my everyday life. So there's this concept in psychology, high self monitors and low self monitors. This idea that some people go through life as high self monitors, where like you're always working to adapt your language and your demeanor and whatever to who you're around. And so in this context, you say certain things and you act in a certain way. And in this context, you adapt to be what's appropriate to this situation. And then there are low self monitors who are much more like, it's all about authenticity, baby. Like, I'm going to be who I am. And it's me, and that high self monitors can look at low self monitors and see them as like, lacking tact, being rude because they're not adapted to the situation. And low self monitors can look at high self monitors and see them as two-faced and not authentic. And I am very much a high self monitor. So like, I'm very aware of like how I engage with different people. And when I speak to different crowds, I do use different language and different examples and different whatever. And I do also always have in the back of my head, okay, so when somebody watches a video of a thing that I said in this space and they're not from this space, how are they going to hear these words? And it's really tough to like do all that. Like,
oh my gosh,
keep all that in your head.
It's impossible.
Right? Because sometimes the things you have to say to like get through the 101, like remedial education piece for one group or one person is stuff that like for somebody else, it's like, how could you even use that analogy? Like, that's so offensive to me. And I don't know how you do that. And yet at the same time, I've also seen people working in this space who got accused of being two-faced, inauthentic, in the worst of ways because they were using different language. And there was a sense of like, you're just telling everybody what their itching ears long to hear.
Well, what a good Bible verse to throw in there.
Gotta throw that in. So everybody who did a lot of Sunday school, who grew up in the church, they like catch that language. Other people like, I don't know what that's a reference to.
What is itching ears?
Itching ears. Wow.
I cannot pretend that I do that well all the time, but that is always the goal to which I aspire. And, the reasons why people attach to our work is it's going to be different for the LGBTQ Christian than it is, of course, for, faith environments that are trying to figure out how to love LGBTQ folks, whether or not they ever come to a place of affirming LGBTQ people. So I think that, sometimes language and culture, I try to like tone it to what words people understand, but also to educate at the same time. So I'm not using double language. And it's impossible. I can't say that I do it perfectly, but I think like for my own sense of integrity, I want to know that I'm not being duplicitous. And I want to know that if I'm saying something, it's something that I feel confident enough that I'll stand by it. And, but it's very, very difficult. And you do get slaughtered sometimes for things that you say. And, at the end of the day, I think just having the humility to be like, you know what, I may have messed that one up, and I'm sorry. I've had a lot of moments like that.
I find that I am like terrified. Like I feel like I'm not good at social media these days. And part of it is because I'm terrified all the time ever to post anything, because like everything that I start to post, I have a voice in my head that's like, oh, but somebody's going to not like this thing. Right. And, and even about stupid stuff, and like I just being like really very, very open here.
We're all there.
All right. So like I live in Orlando, right? So theme parks are everywhere here. And one of the big theme parks is Universal. And the thing that Universal's theme parks are probably best known for right now is their Harry Potter stuff. Well, I remember when Christians in churches like the one I grew up in saw Harry Potter as something that Christians should have nothing to do with. So if
I was one of those Christians.
Right?
I've now read all the books and movies and repented of my bad ways.
which 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 probably some people would use against you. Like, well, see, this is where you went wrong.
Well.
But so, like, I find myself, I mean, this is kind of a silly example, not really super silly, but like, my work, I do a lot of work in conservative Christian spaces. And so, so then if I post on social media that like I am at, at Universal Studios, at a Harry Potter attraction or something like that, who's gonna like be offended? Who's gonna like, and on the one hand, like, you can't live like that, always second guessing everything. And on the other hand, if you don't think about these things, like, how many celebrities have we seen like their career go into the toilet because of something that they posted on social media or so, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it drives me crazy to the point that I'm like afraid ever to post or say anything. And part of why I started wanting to have like these conversations like we're having right here is that nuance gets lost in tweets and Facebook posts. And when we have this conversation, we have time to like dig into stuff and get immediate feedback from folks who are watching, and then come back and have more conversation later or whatnot, and I feel like I'm missing that in the rest of my life, and it makes me afraid of like everything, and it's paralyzing.
Well, it is. And I think especially when you are known as a public figure, which you have had a whole different time of that than I have. We're a small little scrappy organization. We have not had near the press or the exposure that I don't have a Wikipedia page. Let's just say.
Well, wait till this conversation goes viral, and then see what
Let's see what people say. But yes, exactly. Like, I think what ends up happening when you're in that role is suddenly you lose yourself, because suddenly you're always editing and you never get to be you.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I realized about 7 years into this was that I didn't have any space where I could just be authentic for myself and like really talk to somebody about my own questions and struggles. And it was really damaging my own soul to not have that. So I'm going to give a plug for Oriented to Love, the dialogue events that they do, because that was the first space for me where I could, talk about faith and sexuality with a small group of people that I didn't know. And I could be honest about the things I was dealing with. And a lot of grief came out for me in that time. But I was able to actually, come to a conversation with my full self for the first time in a long, long time. And I think we struggle to do that sometimes when we're sort of seen as this figurehead of something, and it's damaging. And I think LGBTQ folks who were raised in faith environments do that kind of editing all the time with everyone about who do I share, who do I come out with, who do I correct when they misgender my spouse or misgender me, or, and I can't imagine the burden that is on a daily basis. That's the destroyer of our souls. And I think God has something better for us than that. Yeah. But it's a tough balance for sure.
I appreciate this. So we're about out of time, but like, okay, before we like wrap this up, you're talking about being your authentic self. So, I'm a geek. I have been very, very public about my geekhood, with my, GeekyJustin and all this stuff. I feel like most people are geeks about something. Like, there's something that like you are like really into, something that you really like, that like whatever. So, I want to know. I don't know the answer to this. What are you a geek about? Is there anything that you geek out about? Anything that like that you collect or like really love, or like your secret little hobby? What do you geek about?
I don't don't know that I think the geekiest thing about me is my love of theology, honestly. Like I have, like theological quotes. Like I literally have like my Bible verse notebook here, that I keep up for me to like, read encouraging verses when I've had a tough day or whatever. I mean, I think the geekiest thing about me is I just enjoy reading theological works and like some of my favorite years of my life were in seminary. Like I was like, I get to read and write papers about, like, I love writing papers. Like, who does that, But I mean, other than that, I mean, the thing that I most love in my life is my daughter. And that's what I geek out about. She's just sort of the love of my life and just the light of both her dad and me. And we just adore her. So anyway, she's turning 2 this month. So we just are having a lot of fun with her. She's what I geek out about most days.
I think that's a great answer. Both the theology and your daughter. And happy birthday to your daughter.
Oh, thank you.
We'll
send you a picture.
Thanks.
With her Dora the Explorer cake.
What's that?
With her Dora the Explorer cake.
Oh, Dora the Explorer.
Yeah.
There's a movie.
That's something I'm geeky about. Baking. Yeah. I like making fancy treats. Yeah.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
See, there's always something. There's something people enjoy, but I love the idea of you as this like theology geek. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing before we end that I want to ask you about. This is actually on the more serious side, but I pulled up your website, the LOVEboldly website, and I love that you've got these core values. You've got 7, good number, 7 core values. Do you want to say anything about these? Offensive sanctuary, treasonous friendship, conflicted conviction, subversive listening, narrative honesty, insolent kindness, and obstinate loyalty. Those are so great. Where did that come from?
Oh, that was a joint effort with our board a number of years ago. And we just sort of came to a place where we wanted to find a geeky, wordsmithy way to capture the things that make LOVEboldly special and unique. And so we came up with those. I think the one that stands out to me the most and that I hear people connect to the most is the treasonous friendship one. And I think it sort of encapsulates the others, but just this idea that even if somebody feels like a threat to my own tribe, doesn't mean that I can't be a friend to them. And that is what Christ was to us when we were his enemies. He befriended us. And so just this idea that we don't have to go with the flow of the world and the culture around us. Like, I've always been somebody that when people say, well, that's just the way it is, I'm like, well, that's not the way it has to be. We can dream of something better than what we have. And right now, what we have in conversations on faith and sexuality is not good enough. And I just really believe that if we lived into those core values, we would find something really special in friendship, deep friendship with one another. Even if we can't get onto the same theological page, I think that would change and transform us in really important ways.
That's amazing. And that would be the perfect place to end were it not for the fact that in the comments, a couple of our regular viewers are harassing me about the fact that I haven't asked you if you like pineapple on pizza, which is...
Yes,
this
I
question
love pineapple on pizza.
Do you?
Yes, it's like my favorite.
I love pineapple on pizza too, and this is a thing that's become like a regular question that they want me to ask everybody, and I hadn't asked you yet. So there you go.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone that wants to send me a pineapple pizza, I will eat it.
I have to show you. This is JD has for folk, you can't see this, but the folks who are watching can put this as like pineapple emoji on pizza emoji, and Eric did a whole row of pizza and pineapple emojis with a like thinking emoji. So now you know, you guys.
But this is something we can dialogue about. We don't have to, part ways as friends if we don't agree on pineapple on pizza.
Some people might say that this is a,
the dividing line.
All right. Well, so I before we close out, I want to remind everybody that this show, Geeky Justin Live, I finally named it. I just decided I'll just call it Geeky Justin Live. But it is now a podcast, so you can find all the past episodes in audio form by searching Geeky Justin Live in iTunes. You can also find it in video form at youtube.com/GeekyJustin. I want to give my special thanks to all my Gold Star patrons, Liz, Tom, Christopher, Carol, Bruce, John, Larry, and Terry, and to all the other patrons who make it possible to do this. This takes a lot of time and also some money for equipment and software and stuff and energy to do this every week. And I'm so grateful to you all. And mostly, Heidi, thank you so much for your time and your energy and for all of the work that you do. I just think it's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. You have been a long inspiration for me, and some of my best moments were at GCN in the beginning. So I have a debt of gratitude to pay to you. So I'm really grateful for that, and so honored to be with you tonight. So.
Well, thanks. Well, I would love to do this again because you're a lot of fun to talk to, and I think there are more things that we could talk to. So, so thanks so much, and everybody, thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful week. Be excellent to each other. I got to channel the Bill and Ted once in a while. And don't forget the nuance. Good night, everyone.
Good night.